We're going to start off our project by building the index template first. Now remember, the index template is the one that gets used if no other template can be found. When we were mapping out which templates we're going to use, remember that the index template is also going to take care of our archive pages, our blog post index, and our search results page. So this is going to be a pretty important page for us. Before we start writing any HTML, let's take a look at what we already have in place. So here in the CSS folder, we have blocks.css. These are going to be some CSS rules that are related to some blocks that we'll create. Editor.css, and this is the CSS file that's going to control our editor styles inside of Gutenberg. And style.css. And this is what has most of the styles related to any of the elements that we put in our theme templates. Now, if you've looked in the final folder, you'll notice that there's one style sheet that's missing, and that's our theme.css, because that theme.css gets controlled by Pinegrow. And to do that, we come over here to the design panel and we say activate. For our project, I didn't change any of these colors, but if you wanted to, you could just click on the swatch and either use the color picker or use the hex codes to put in the color that you want. You could also change the color name by clicking on the name and changing it here. However, for our project, do not change these because the other CSS files rely on these color names. Under typography, we can select our typography for regular text and headings. And if you click on the field, you'll see that we have some already predefined. Or if you go all the way to the bottom to manage fonts, you can select more or add more fonts this way. If you want to add a Google font, just say add fonts, come down to Google Fonts, put in the name, click on it and say add selected font. For our project, we're just going to select regular text is going to be Arial with the fallback of Helvetica and sans serif. And for headings, we're going to use Georgia with the fallback of serif. For my background color, I want that to be white, so I'll just click on this and then come over and make sure that I choose my white color. And we'll leave everything else the way that it is. When I save that file, you'll notice that it wrote a theme.css over here. Let's take a look at what's in there. In our theme.css, we have some normalize rules. We've got a box sizing rule, and then some variables for our color palettes. We also have the rules created for our typography. So our body font family is going to be Arial with Helvetica and sans serif as the fallback. And our headings 1 through 6 are going to be Georgia with a fallback of serif. We've also told it that the body color is going to be white, and it automatically wrote the rule that the body HTML is going to have a minimum height of 100 VH. You don't have to use the design palette if you don't want to. You can define all of it inside your own CSS, but I like to use this because it's nice for me to come back and easily reference the color palette. So now that we have our theme.css in place, I'm going to open up the style.css file. And this has a bunch of stuff in it. It basically has every rule that we're going to use inside of all of our template files. So I did try to create a little bit of structure and organization here, and anybody that's ever written CSS by hand knows that managing this stuff is just a bear no matter what you do. So at the top of the CSS file, I defined some variables, and I defined the variable for background color light is my white variable, and that pulls straight here from the design palette, this white color. My background color dark is going to be my dark variable. My base text size is 1 rem. And then we have some basic definitions for text sizes, as well as heading sizes, viewport sizes, default page paddings, and default section spacings. With all those variables defined, then we come in and do some of the rules. So I use those variables to set some typography on my body, as well as my headings, links, link cover color, and some paragraph settings. In section 1.4, I have some classes set up for spacing. So for example, this class of layout underscore X padding lets me set my left and right padding based on the variables that I've set earlier. This layout constrained class has a maximum width of my maximum width variable, as well as margin left and margin right of auto to center the content that's in there. And then I have a Y padding spacing class that just tells me to use 2 rems of spacing at the top and the bottom of anything that this is applied to. Next, in section 1.5, I've got some global rules, and these are just things that I've found helpful over the years, and I use as a starting point for almost all of my projects. You can feel free to look through any of these, steal them, whatever you want to do. But for this project, let's keep them in place because certain things do rely on them. In section 1.6, I have some utility classes that I've created. So things like screen reader text, some news columns, some container width utilities, some hyphenation utilities, alignment classes, removing margin blocks, things like that. Next, in 2.0, we've got some core components. So we have rules for things like our logos, our buttons, social icons. 3.0 has our layout and structure. So this has our classes related to our grid structure and other layouts. 4.0 has some headers. 5.0 is huge because this has all the rules related to our menus. 6.0 has our footer related rules. 7.0 has our sidebar rules. 8.0 has the rules that are related to our core templates. And then I've got other placeholders here for other things. At the very bottom, here be dragons. And that's because when Pinegrow creates a new rule, it's always going to put it at the bottom. So what I find is every now and then I'll come into here and I will look at anything that is below 999 and put it in the section where it belongs just to help keep things organized. So that's our style.css file. The next one we're going to look at is our editor.css. So we'll open that in the code editor and we'll see that this has a lot of the same sort of things. So this again has some variables that are defined and some basic typography rules. So this editor.css file is going to be kind of similar to the beginning of the style.css, definitely not as comprehensive though. The reason for this style sheet is because the Gutenberg editor inside WordPress has its own style sheet, and sometimes that doesn't match up with what you want. So later in this project, when we get around to that part, we're going to use this editor.css to override the things that are inside the Gutenberg editor. And for that, we're going to want to define some colors, some typography, and some other basic styling. And then lastly, we have blocks.css. As we go through the project, we're going to create both some theme templates and some blocks. And this blocks.css file is where we're going to store the CSS for those blocks. Putting your block styles inside of style.css isn't necessarily a bad thing, but using its own CSS file will be better. So let's close these out. And now let's put some content in our index page. So for that, rather than writing all the HTML, let's switch over to VS Code and we'll open up our no-code theme starter folder. We'll open up the index.html file. We'll copy all of this and we will paste it inside of index. And there we have it. Let's switch over to our tree view so that we can see everything. And in here, you'll see that we've got a header, we've got a body section, and a footer section. Right now, this isn't going to do anything with WordPress. However, coming back over here to the project panel, you'll see that our index.html says index.php next to it. And that means that this HTML file, when it gets exported to WordPress, is going to get exported as index.php. That's a default behavior of Pinegrow, is that it takes whatever your file name is, HTML, and exports it as that same file name with the extension of PHP. If you want to override that, you come up to the HTML element in the tree view, to the WordPress theme builder pane. And once we configure this for WordPress, you'd be able to change what that's going to be exported as. So in our next video, we'll take this HTML file and turn it into a real WordPress template. In this video, we're going to take the index.html file and turn it into a real WordPress template. So the first thing that we're going to do is come over to our WordPress panel and click on page settings so that we can configure it for WordPress. When we do that, we see that we have a bunch of options here. First of all, we have export as, and this lets us choose what template we're going to export it as. And then we have this thing saying master page. I'll explain what a master page is in just a minute. Then we have a preview URL. This lets us preview the page on our demo server. So let's click on the open preview button. And you can see that it opened up the page that we defined in our project settings. If we want to override that page, we would just enter a different URL in there. Next, we have some export options. So we can choose to use it as a template. We can choose not to export the page at all. And then we can say, don't export any template parts that are inside of this page. This will all make sense in a little bit. We have some other options in here for importing WordPress content and automatically adding WordPress actions. We're not going to do either of those things in this class. For now, we'll come up to export as, and I'm going to click on the dropdown and select index.php. Again, we don't have to do that because we're already called index.html and it's already going to export it as whatever that file name is with PHP at the end, but I like to define it in there anyway. So master pages have a really interesting feature, and by default, our index.php is going to be our master page. Master pages in Pinegrow define three things. They define the header, they define the footer, and they define a site content. So what that means is if you have different templates that need different headers and footers, you would want to create a different master page for each of those. If you have just one header and footer site-wide like we are, we just have one master page. And the way we define the header and footer is actually by defining where we're going to store our body content. So let's come over here to the tree view. I'm going to collapse things down. So we have header. This div right here is going to hold our body content. And then we have our footer. And here on the content section, I'm going to use a very special WordPress theme builder action called site content. And now what that does is anything that's inside of site content is defined as the content of the site. Anything above it gets defined as the header. Anything below it gets defined as the footer. It's kind of confusing in theory, so let me show you what that looks like in an actual template file. So here inside VS Code, I have our theme export folder open. And if I open up our index.php file, you'll see it starts off by saying get header. And then we come in and we have the body of the template, the content, and at the bottom we say get footer. So those get header and get footer are just saying get those template parts for header and footer. If we look at it over here, we can open up our header.php and we've got all of our header information. And footer.php has our footer template part. And when you put all of it together, you end up with one complete page. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and open that up on the test website. So here's our test server. We'll come over to Appearance Themes. I've got our no-code theme demo. We'll activate that. Look on the front end, and you can see that it's pulling the header, and it's pulling the footer, and now we have the body in the middle. And yes, it's missing a bunch of images. We don't have a menu defined. There's a lot of things that aren't happening right now, and that's okay. So since we just took a look at the website and we saw that there were some things that were missing, let's go ahead and fix that. We'll come over to our project tab, and now we just need to make sure that it actually is going to export all the things that it's supposed to. So you'll see some check marks over here and some X's, and this is going to say what is and what is not going to export to WordPress. So screenshot.png should export. Our CSS files should export, and our assets should export. If we right click on any of these and come down to copy to theme or plugin, you have some options, either yes, no, or auto. Most of the time, auto gets it right. Sometimes it doesn't work though. So we'll come in and we'll say WordPress, export the theme. And doing that manual export should force it to take all those things in here that are marked for export and bring them over into WordPress. So now when we come back to our page, and click refresh, we can see all the images the way that they're supposed to be. Now, mind you, it's not pulling these images from the WordPress media library. It's just pulling them from the theme folders. So we're going to want to change that later on, but at least we can make sure that our assets are all going to be there. Same thing if we come back here to themes. We can now see that we have an image in there for the theme, and that's pulling from the screenshot.png that hadn't been exported yet. And now we have all of our structure in there. It's copying all the files over. All we have to do is tell it which WordPress actions we want to apply to which elements. We'll come over here and we will go to our tree view. And I'm going to start on the content part first. So I'll just expand this. And the first thing that we want to do is to define where the loop is going to be. What the loop does is kind of complicated, so rather than try to explain it here on this video, I'm going to point you to the developer.wordpress.org website and go to the Theme Developer Handbook, Theme Basics, and the Loop. This really is worth reading. Even if you don't understand what all the code is, you at least want to understand that it's the default mechanism that WordPress uses for getting the theme's information from the template files. If you've used other page builders before, the concept is sort of similar to using a loop element or a repeater element. Although when you're creating a theme, you want to make sure that there is a master loop on every page. And then if you want to do additional loops in there, you can do that. But every template page needs to have at least one loop to be able to pull the content in it. The good news is that adding the loop to a template inside of Pinegrow is super simple. All you have to do is select the element that's going to contain the loop. So for this example, we're going to select the div that's underneath our site content. We come over to our WordPress actions, and we select the show posts action. By default, it's going to put the main loop on there, which is generally what most pages need unless you're creating a custom loop. And you'll see that Pinegrow sets a lot of these things by default. So some of the things that you want to really look at are making sure that it has an item container, which by default is going to be your current element, and then a repeated loop item. So this is the thing that if you have something that's going to repeat, like on an archive page, this is the element that's going to repeat over and over again. So since this index page is going to be an archive, we want to make sure that this is actually selected and it's not the element that we're already applying the loop to. So the element that I want to use for the repeated loop element is going to be this list item right here. This is the thing that holds my article card. So to select it, I just click on the dropdown. And as I'm moving through, you'll see on the left-hand side that it's highlighting the elements. I just find the one that I want to select to be repeated, click on it, and we're done. The next thing that I want to do is replace this article title with the title of the article that's going to be pulled from the loop. So I can select it, and for my WordPress actions, I say post title. Above it is the link, and I want that to be my post link. Down here, this paragraph, I want this to be the excerpt. So I'll select post excerpt. And I can also put a conditional on there saying only show that element if the excerpt is set. Now, I may or may not want to do this because by default, WordPress is going to grab the first 55 characters of the post if no excerpt is set. This conditional is going to say if there's no excerpt, don't show it at all. So I'm going to leave this unset for right now. Now up here we have two different images, and the reason is because I want to show one of them if there is a featured image, and then I want to have a fallback featured image. So I want this top one to show up as the post's featured image. So I'll select the post featured image action from there, and I can set the size. I want that to just show the medium size featured image. And for right now, I'm going to delete this so that you can understand why I have that there. So I'll delete that. I'm going to save my page, which should automatically export it, but I'm going to click WordPress export anyway for absolutely no good reason. And now when I come back to my site and look at the index homepage, you'll see that it's pulling the titles and excerpts for my pages. And any pages that do have featured images show up here, and any that don't show up. Now we're missing a few things. We don't have any pagination, so I only see what the first 10 or so posts that are in there. And we're also not showing featured images for everything. So let's take care of both of those things. So we'll start off with the image, and that image that we just deleted, we're going to put it back. So I've just got my image element here, and I'm going to duplicate that by clicking on that button. I'll remove my WordPress action, and now I'm going to use a conditional. Now I want to say, if there is a featured image, show this one. If there isn't a featured image, show this one. So to do that, I come back here to my WordPress, and I'm going to use conditions. So I scroll down here to my conditionals, and I find if has post thumbnail, and I apply it to the top one. So this says if there is a post thumbnail, show that post featured image. We can click on the preview PHP code to see just what that looks like on the PHP side. So it says if has post thumbnail, then get the ID and show the post thumbnail. On the one below it, we're going to do the same thing. It says if has post thumbnail and say not. And if we look at the code, we can just say if it does not have the post thumbnail, then show that image. So this can be useful for showing things like a logo or any other kind of default thumbnail image that you might want to show. Here I'm just setting the image inside the theme, but something that might be useful to do would be to create a custom field either in the customizer or on a settings page so that the users can upload an image that gets shown site-wide. We'll save this, refresh our page, and there we go. Now you can see that anything that did not have an image already shows our default image, and the one that did have a featured image shows the featured image. I'm also going to click on one of these items here just so you can see what happens. Because we only have a index template created, it has to use that template for everything. And right now our index template does not have anything that would show the content of a post. It only has things that will show the loop of the post. So on the home page, that loop is going to be the archive for the whole website. So that's going to show all the posts that it can find. But now that we're on a page, the loop is just the information for that page that we're on, which is why we're only seeing the one card with the information from the page. Let's go back to the home page. So the other thing that we want to do here is to add some pagination in there. And if you come back to our designs, you can see that the pagination is probably going to be one of those things that you would want to create a template part for. Right now, we're only using it once, but actually later on in this project, we're going to create a different archive template for a different thing, and we're going to use it over again. So let's go ahead and start creating some template parts right now. Now, if we wanted to, we could create the template part straight here on the index.html page, but I don't like doing that. I actually like creating a separate page to hold our parts. And that's as much for organizational purposes as anything else. So we'll come back to VS Code, and we've got our starter files. We'll open up parts.html, copy the information in there. We're going to create a parts.html inside of our project. So we'll just right-click up there and say Add New Page. Plain HTML page. We'll call it parts.html. We'll edit the code, paste that in. And now you can see that we've got some template parts for different things that are already created. We can come over to the tree and we'll collapse sidebars because we're not using those yet. We'll collapse social icons. What we really care about is our pagination. So the first thing that we need to do in order to create the template part is to tell it what we're going to do with this page. So we'll come up here to the top of the page, the HTML element, and we'll say page settings. And by default, it's going to want to create this page as a template. However, we don't want to use it as a template. It's just a utility page really for us. So I'm going to say, don't export this page. This still lets me use WordPress actions on it, but it's not going to export it as a template. The next thing I want to do is take the div that's holding what's going to be that template part, and I want to define the template part. And I just select that, come over to the WordPress actions, and I'm going to just type in part here to filter this list that I'm not searching for it. I'm going to use the global smart action reusable template part. And this lets me define the template part or use the template part. And I want to call this template part Pagination. And if we remember from a few videos ago, in classic themes, we generally want to keep our template parts inside of a subfolder called template parts. So I want this to actually be template parts /pagination. And then I'm going to say define template part. Now I'll save this and I'll export it. And when I look at our exported directory inside of VS Code, you can see that it's created this template parts folder with pagination.php. And in there we have some HTML. This isn't smart enough to do any pagination yet because we haven't told it how the pagination is going to work, but it started to create that template part for us. So now back in Pinegrow, we're going to select this div, which is going to be the wrapper for the whole pagination, and we're going to apply a pagination WordPress action to it. So we'll use the post smart action post pagination. We're going to say use this element as the pagination template. And now I want to define a few things. So I want to define which item is going to show the previous item. So I'll click on that. And I want it to be this anchor. I want to find the one that's going to be our next page item. So it's going to be the anchor that has the right arrow in it. We'll find the element that's going to be repeated for each page. So that's generally going to be the one that has the number on it. And I want to select the list item for that. If I wanted to apply a specific class to it, I could. Next, we're going to select the active page item. So this is going to show what page we're on. So I'll choose the list item for that. Then we're going to select an element that has dots. So if we have multiple pages that would just span on for way too long, it would show ... So I'll select the list item for that. And if I wanted to show something like, page 5 of 9, I could also do something like that using these two fields. But for right now, I think I've got this about as defined as I want it for our purposes. Now, when I say that, you see that it says quick export was done, but we need to do a full export. And that's because it needs to write out some things into the functions file. So now that we have the pagination template part created, we'll come back to our index page and we're going to apply that someplace. I've got a div created here called div.pagination, and this is where we're going to put that template part. So we just select that, come back here, I'll clear out my filters. I'll come down and I'll select the reusable template part smart action. And you can see that it already has it listed in there, template parts, pagination. And we're not going to define it because we've already done that on the other page. So now I can save this, export the whole theme. And when we refresh the page, you can see that it has added pagination in there as a template part. And our pagination works the way that it should. The last thing that we want to do in here is we want to give this a page title. Now this is going to be just a little bit tricky because of the way that WordPress handles page titles. If we look at our WordPress actions, we've got a few things. We've got post title, we've got page title, which uses the function WP title. We've got the title attributes, single post title, get the title, lots and lots of things in here. Thing is, for the default page, none of those really apply. Archive titles are just weird in the way that they work. So anytime that I have an archive page that's going to be used for multiple things, like for example, this one's going to be for the regular blog page, for the regular archive titles, for search results, all those kind of things, I actually want to come in and instead of using any of these that are predefined, I'm going to do a custom function just by using the global smart action of function. I'm going to say custom code. And we're going to use this function that Pinegrow doesn't have in there yet called the archive title. And I'm going to tell it to replace the content of my H1 with the archive title. So we'll save this. And now you'll see when I refresh it, it changes it to archives. If I didn't do that, let's remove this and we'll use one of the other ones. So if I used post title smart action, refresh, you'd see that it does this thing where it says post format standard. That's not what we want. And what it's doing is it's picking up the first title that's in the loop and using that as the page title. That's definitely not what we would want for an archive page. So we'll get rid of this one. We'll try the title, which actually does the same thing. And you might be tempted to try this one out that says post type archives title. Check this out, which also isn't going to give us anything. So in this particular case, when we're looking at the main blog archive, I recommend just using the archive title custom function. And this is just a function that's built into WordPress. I'm not sure why Pinegrow hasn't put it inside of their WordPress actions yet, but it gives me exactly what I'm looking for. And you'll see that once we build out the search feature, this will say search results for whatever. When we do an author archive, it'll show the author's name in there. It basically does exactly what you would expect from a title. The next thing that we want to do to round out the content section of our index template is to work on our sidebar part. So for this, again, we're going to come back to our parts.html and I'll close my pagination. And this time I'll open up the sidebar section. And just so you can see what we're doing a little bit better, let's increase the UI zoom here. In this template part, I want to create a list of the categories and a list of the tags that are on the site. So just like we did before, I'm going to start off by creating the template part by using the smart action, reusable template part. And I'm going to call that template part template-parts/sidebar. And I'm going to define the template part. Next thing I want to do is to take this link that has my categories, and I'm going to use the site tags and categories smart action to define the categories here. And I want to order them by however many are in there, count down. So it's going to have the categories with the most posts at the top and the least at the bottom. And I only want to show 10 of them. So for range of items to show, I'm going to do 0 to 9 since it starts with 0. Nothing else is going to change here. If I wanted to do something fancy by having different item containers, repeated items, kind of like a loop, I could do that. Otherwise, I can just use a smart action as is. We'll look at the code really quick. And you can see that it's doing a term query here. So it's defining the arguments, and then it's doing a loop. We'll do the same thing here for the tags. I'll do site and tag categories, and we'll do taxonomy is going to be post tag, and we will do count down 0 to 9. We'll save that. Come back to our index page. And inside of this, I have a div that holds the sidebar. And then I've got the div that I want to apply the template part to. So I'll just say reusable template part. Choose my sidebar template part. And because I have applied that template part to a parent of this thing that just says sidebar template part, it's not going to show template sidebar part on the front end. It's going to just replace this and everything underneath of it. So let's save that, go to our front end, refresh, and there we have it. It's now replaced that with the template part that shows our categories and our tags. So that takes care of the content section of our index template. Next thing we're going to work on is going to be the header, followed by the footer.